the best way to fight what is happening is to fight fire with fire. You know, when they go low, I say go toe to toe. So, yeah, baby, I'm a DEI hire because I'm overly freaking qualified.
Give us the truth. How in trouble are we right now?
I think we're in trouble. I do think that people raising their voices is something that can and will still make a difference, but we are in a power struggle, if you will. Politics is happening every single day, whether we participate or not. I would also argue that a lot of well-meaning progressives in this country believe some of the terrible things that some of the people in the MAGA coalition believe. Sometimes I couldn't distinguish my progressive friends from my conservative ones.
I think most people still agree that the sky is blue, but that's like pretty much it these days.
Until the president tries to say, well, on Tuesdays it's purple. People love Susie Wiles because she gets in no one's way in the White House. She has no control. It is very clear every single day. But sure, yes, she is the first woman to serve as a White House chief of staff. When it comes to Democratic leadership, I don't understand the rationale that people in New York are using for not supporting their Democratic nominee. I just don't. To be clear, the Democrats are playing by the rules a little much. Yeah. But I do believe that there are people that work for the president that have been very clear that they do hate people of color, that they do hate immigrants, and that they do think less of black people. And those people, like Stephen Miller, are in charge.
Symone Sanders.
Greetings.
Your resume is very long, and it could take up this whole podcast, but I'll just give I'll give some highlights. Pride of Nebraska,
yes.
Right?
Go Big Red.
Bernie Sanders' first campaign national press secretary, senior advisor to President Biden, former chief spokeswoman to Vice President Harris. You're now the co-host of the Weeknight, 7 p.m.
7 p.m. on MSNBC, soon to be MS Now.
There we go. And then the upcoming MSNBC Live 25, This Is Who We Are event on October 11th.
Yes,
right?
We will be there. Me, Michael Steele, Alicia Menendez, and the whole, as I like to say, the MSNBC Avengers.
And where's it going to be?
It's in New York at this amazing, last year we did it the first year we did it, it was in Brooklyn.
Yep.
And this year we've got a bigger venue, more people, and more in-person activations, and then different types of panels. And so, like last year, Michael and Alicia and I were in the evening. This year, we're in the morning, which is frankly what we're used to from back in the day, from the weekend. And Rachel, obviously, is going to do a session. Morning Joe, Mika and Joe are joining this year. They didn't do anything there last year. Nicole Wallace will be there. So it is a real immersive, I would argue, experience. And then some folks will have the opportunity to like have dinner with some of the hosts, depending on what kind of ticket they get. So get your tickets now, folks.
Well, listen, you've been at this for a while now. I'm still getting into the whole political commentary space. But what's striking to me when I'm in the studio is like it's just a few people hanging out and you must forget sometimes the scale of the number of people watching. So it must be rewarding to go to in-person events like this and just see all the people. You know, the
MSNBC audience, I think, is very distinct. Like, you do TV all over now. You're on our network. I've seen you on others. And when you go places, particularly with the folks, they are hardcore. But the people that watch MSNBC, they're like, I have you guys on from 7 to 9 to 11. And I'm like, well, I want you to walk away at one point. I want you to get dinner. Okay, are you working from home? Does your boss know you watching TV? But that to me means that they are engaged. And so I think that this hybrid model actually is the future really for lots of, for growing. And I mean, MSNBC is a place where it's just hard in the cable news landscape across the board right now, but we are a place where we are growing. And so to be able to get hundreds of, potentially thousands of people to buy tickets to sign up, like, you know, it's not Andy Cohen and the Bravo folks. We're talking about news with Rachel Maddow. So I absolutely think it's a blessing, and I think a real responsibility and a sign of the times.
Absolutely. I mean, look, we need people more engaged than ever, and you, both in your political career as well as your media career, has been known to be a truth teller. Give us the truth.
Sometimes to my detriment.
How in trouble are we right now?
I think we're in trouble. And I say that because I have a therapist. I think most people need a therapist, especially if you live in Washington, D.C. If you're listening across the country, get you a therapist. Maybe
multiple ones.
Right? Call your EAP hotline, folks. That's right. Your company is paying for it. It takes 90 days to make or break a habit. And in the first 90 days of the second iteration of the Trump administration, so much happened so quickly. I think that a lot of people were shocked. Some of us were not shocked, but I think a lot of people, a lot of our institutions and some of our organizations were kind of in this country in terms of the educational institutions, right? Organizations, maybe some of these outside groups, definitely the institution that is Congress, right? I think a lot of people were shocked by what was happening, but the Trump administration had a plan. They wrote it down. They told us about it. It was Project 2025. And in 90 days, so much happened. And I think that we have actually crossed the Rubicon and the lexicon. Like, if this is not a constitutional crisis, I'm unsure about what is. So, yes, we are in trouble. Are we at a place where we are at a point of no return? I don't think so, because we still live in my opinion, the greatest country in the history of the world. And in America, the people do still have the power. I mean, your show is literally called The People's Cabinet. And we see that the people have the power in all of these different ways where, folks have risen up and pushed back and really pushed their elected officials to step it up in different ways. And I just remember when the Trump administration, it was literally maybe 2 months in, they took the Medicaid services offline, the portal offline. So all of these like local organizations, Head Start groups, they could not access this portal. And the portal is accessing the funds by which they pay their people that work for them. Well, the people in the streets out in the country from the Head Starts were calling up their elected officials, whether they were Democrats or Republicans, saying, hey, I won't be able to pay, my practitioners this month. We're going to have to shut down if this happens. And within 24 hours after that uproar, the administration backed off. So I do think that people raising their voices is something that can and will still make a difference, but we are in a power struggle, if you will. And so I think that one of the defining debates of this moment that we're in, frankly, and I think this is a moment that we will endure between now and 2028, is the people versus the power. And it's like a push and pull. And if people just start to feel powerless, if people start to believe that there's nothing that they can do here, it's just all like they're going to do whatever they're going to do and it's a foregone conclusion, that is when we have crossed the point of no return.
So in the context of today's political environment, you've seen politics for a long time. How did you originally get into it?
I got in through local politics. I was interning for my mayor's office while I was in college. It was like my sophomore year.
And who encouraged you to do it, or you just kind of stumbled upon?
Well, one of the mayor's special assistants, I went to church with her. And, I heard about the internship. I'd had other internships, but I was really interested. I thought in working in communications in like a city capacity. So I wanted to know what that would be like. So I applied, Miss Stacy, she got me my internship. Shout out to Miss Stacy Westbrook. And on my first day, there was a recall petition for the mayor. So.
And did you get what was going on at the time? Or you just kind of like, what the hell?
I did. I was like, wow. So they're going to recall the mayor, but in Nebraska, unlike in other places, you have to have 2 elections. So first, you have to have an election to see if the municipality wants the recall to happen.
Got it.
And then if they vote yes, then you actually have the recall, situation. Yeah. So I actually, in addition to my internship, I went to volunteer on the mayor's effort to beat the recall. And he beat the recall, but he lost re-election a couple years later because if they're trying to recall you midway
not
through,
a great sign,
writing is on the wall. But through there, I met these guys that own a firm. They were out of Tennessee, but they were called into Omaha to help, organize North and South Omaha, the predominantly African-American and Latino parts of the city. And they worked in places all over the country. So I continued to work with them while I was in school. And that's where I got the bulk of my legislative and campaign experience. So I did mayor's races all over the country, judges' races. In Nebraska, judges are appointed. So I had no idea that judges were elected in some places. I did state legislative races. And I did all of that up until I moved here to D.C. And then eventually I landed at Senator Sanders' campaign. And I did that I ran around the country for about a year and some change, came back to D.C. I was a commentator at CNN for a while. I was a professional fellow. And then I did not think I wanted to work the 2020 cycle. I was like, I don't think I want to be out there like that. But there came a point where I didn't want to be on the sidelines, kind of watching what was happening and what I thought was a very consequential election. I wanted to, kind of be in it. And I ended up working with Joe Biden. And it was just so crazy how I ended up with my job.
And it was during COVID, right?
It was this was pre-COVID. So the campaign started, remember, 2019 is when he announced. And I met with him early 2019 at his house. And then by the end of our meeting, he's like, well, do you want to work here? And I was like, I've got a flight, so I'm going to let you know.
What was that like? How long was that meeting?
I was supposed to be there for maybe like 15 minutes, and I ended up being there for an hour. He took me on a tour. I waited for Dr. Biden to get home.
Sounds about right.
It was, it was quintessential Joe Biden, as you know.
Yes.
And I did end up, saying yes, working on that campaign, and so many things happened. Obviously, COVID happened in the middle of the presidential campaign, which made it difficult, to say the least, in terms of what we were trying to do. And then, obviously, Joe Biden went on to win that race after about a week of counting the ballots. Shout out to mail-in ballots. And I worked the first year in the Biden administration, Biden-Harris administration. That's where I met you. We worked together there. And it has just really been, so now being on the side of, given all of my experience in politics, and at the White House especially, now being on the side of really helping put some context and talking about and reporting on what is now happening in this insane, this is nothing that we've ever experienced before, okay? Every other week it's unprecedented.
Yeah.
And I do think there are some through lines, though, not just through my, career, if you will, but throughout history. And so that is really what I try to focus on as I'm out here talking to people, as I'm traveling, as we're putting together like what we're doing for our show every night. How can we pull the layers back, like pull the curtain back on what's happening? But also, where's the historical context here? Because a mentor of mine once told me that history is unbroken continuity. And I would argue, just like after the Civil War, during Reconstruction, that post-Reconstruction period when all of the gains that were made were trying to be erased, and the people that took up arms against this government as treasonous traitors to succeed against the Union were literally welcomed back with open arms, and then statues were being erected of them by the Daughters of the Confederacy to rewrite history. We are in a moment like that right now, where the January 6th, the people who took up arms against the government, the president's calling them patriots. They're hanging out. They join in the ICE militia. Yep. So I do think that there are many things that history can teach us about what we are experiencing right now. Speaking
of pulling back the onion, give me your craziest story from either the campaign or your time working in the administration that you can tell us.
The craziest story I can tell. I mean, there are so many, but I will give you this one. We were once on a, what do they call them? The trips where we go.
Oconus.
Yes, our Oconus, as I learned that they were called.
Overseas something?
The government just uses all kinds of acronyms that the rest of us do not care about.
Correct.
I was like, what is an Oconus? They were like, this is the international trip. I'm like, okay, great. We were on a trip, and it was the trip to the Indo-Pacific that Vice President Harris took. And we visited Vietnam, Singapore. Obviously, this was on the tail end of COVID. She was bringing vaccines from the United States. But this was also during the same time that we were pulling out of Afghanistan. And so there was all that turmoil. Literally, we were on and off the plane on Air Force Two, and we're like in the Situation Room meetings with the headphones trying to hear. And I'll never forget that while we were in Singapore, we had loaded up the press and we were ready to leave. And they were literally on the vans. We were all on the vans. And after a while, they waited for about 45 minutes. And we took everybody off the vans and told everyone to, go back into the hotel, and they needed to wait. Come to find out, there was an incident that happened in Vietnam with the station chief of the CIA station there. And they had to be medevaced out, actually. And so once we found out the details of what was happening, and we had figured it out, and we had made a decision that it was still safe to go, and we were going to go, and all these things. I said, well, wait, what do we tell the reporters? And they're like, well, we can just tell them anything. And I said, I don't think we can. I think we took people off of a van. We made them wait for 45 minutes, and now it's been 3 hours. We're going to have to say something. And I remember looking at the vice president, and I said, well, honestly, respectfully to everyone in the room, and I mean, folks from the NSC were with us, all kind of very important people that definitely outranked me in terms of who's what. But I was a senior advisor and the spokesperson for the vice president. And I looked at the vice president, I said, well, respectfully, it is the vice president's decision about what we say. I said, now, ma'am, I don't know you to be a liar, but are you asking me to lie, or would you like to tell the truth? And she said, well, I'm not a liar. And that required us had to get on the phone with Ron Klain, then the chief of staff to President Biden, get on the phone. While we were there. We had to, somebody was like, well, we got to wake up Tony Blinken, because this is a This is a situation. And it come to find out it was what is commonly known as the Havana Syndrome. That is what had happened in Vietnam. We called it an analogous, something that the people don't understand. Havana Syndrome is what really happened. But I picked that story because now, like, these people would have you believe it is like an act of Congress to tell the president or the vice president no, or to stand up and say, well, these are the stakes here. What do you want to do? And I experienced doing that many times when I worked both in the White House, but when I worked on the campaigns for not just those campaigns. So I worked for Bernie Sanders. When I worked these governor's races, I've worked. So I just have been really struck by when I'm just a little bald black girl from North Omaha, Nebraska. And when I went to go work at the White House, that was my first day I had ever stepped foot in the West Wing. I grew up, I didn't know anybody that worked at the White House. And when I went in there, I was just shocked by how small it was, by just all of these things. Everybody's like, well, you obviously haven't been here. Have not, but I'm definitely a deputy assistant to the president. But what I learned while working in the government is just how much of it is held together by, 100%. Just what we believe to be true and protocol and process, and how little of what the functions, how the government functions is actually codified in law. And so much of it is just about the goodwill of the people who sit in the seats.
1,000%.
And the rest of America, they don't know. They really think that there's some built-in like trappings to stop crazy stuff from going down. And there is nothing there except the people who sit in the seats, except the people whom the president and the vice president hire, except Congress. That's literally it. And we are in a place where the people that sit in the seats are not the people that, care about lying to the press or not. These are not the people that care about telling the truth. And where Congress is just like, oh, right. See no evil, hear no evil.
No, I'm glad you told that story because I think, to your point, everyone talks about public trust.
Yeah.
Do you trust this candidate to be looking out for your best interests? And when you're in the White House, you realize two things. One, the information that's being put out there, this sounds elementary, but it's true, what is being put out there is determined by people who their integrity is really what is making the difference of what comes out. Secondly, to your point, it starts at the top, right? Like, whether it was be President Biden, whether it be the vice president, they set a tone. Sometimes frustratingly so, right? Because Democrats always are getting accused of playing by the rules too much.
Yeah, I mean, to be clear, the Democrats are playing by the rules a little much.
Yeah.
A little much.
But to the point of all these MAGA Republicans who used to work for George W. I think of Scott Jennings, for example.
Oh my God! And I was a fellow with Scott Jennings at Harvard.
Yeah.
I know Scott Jennings. Well, I knew Scott Jennings.
Yeah.
I don't know the person I see on Abby Phillips' show.
Yeah.
But the Scott Jennings I knew, he would just tell the truth.
And it's George W. Bush. You can disagree with him, disagree with other past Republicans, but nowhere was there a precedent of this kind of dishonesty now coming from the top, which feeds to the 4,000 appointees in the administration, feeds through the career. It's almost like an infection that happens, right? So how do you think about that in your role now? As you and I have seen politics for a while, but it's people's information sources are so siloed now. So to your point about the example of the Medicaid disbursement is a good one. How do we think about traversing the different silos that people are currently consuming their news from?
I think this is where relationships, particularly for the people like myself who are in the position of, talking about what happens and reporting on what happens. And now that our show, I used to co-host on the weekend, in the morning on Saturday and Sunday, and that's very different than 7 p.m. So now, oftentimes news is breaking during our show. On Monday is where we got the news that the president tried to fire Lisa Cook. And it happened during our show, so we had to pivot at the end of the show and talk about that. And I know Lisa Cook. I know people that know Lisa Cook. I was texting and calling them, trying to get, while in between the show, trying to get, the skinny on, really, what is happening. And then making sure we grab some guests in there that also have some institutional knowledge about whatever it is that we're talking about. Same thing. Dr. Menares on the news that the CDC director, again, the president tried to fire her, happened during our show. Okay, well, let's jump into it. Who do we know? Who can I call? And those things I think are really important because there's a lot of, nowadays there's all these little sites that will pop up on Threads or, the Bird site or just Facebook that are not rooted in truth. They'll just write anything. But they have millions of retweets, so many likes, people commenting under it.
No community notes.
No community notes. It's just like the people are taking what this quote unquote site, and I'm using quotes, it says to be true. And I think one of the ways to cut through that is to talk to real people, is to say, I spoke with the person. I spoke with somebody that's in there, that was in the meeting today. I talked to so-and-so that like used to run the X, Y, and Z. As you know, all these things are happening right here in Washington, D.C. I pick up the phone and I call the mayor. I'm like, hey, what is da-da-da-da? And I make sure they know I'm calling. I'm calling my capacity as Symone Sanders-Townsend. That means I'm the strategist and the lady to host the show. So you need to let me know if this is off the record, on background, or if you want to be attributed directly. Yeah. But to get the information so that at least what we are saying in the seat from our perspective, where we sit, is as accurate as possible. But the news is changing so quickly every day. Because what I said this morning, depending on what the president puts out on his social media site, and who else, RFK Jr. or whomever decides to try to show the door today, it could be different by tonight.
And then how do we, it used to be that there was at least some objective sense of facts that both sides could agree is true.
LOL.
Like, I think most people still agree that the sky is blue, but that's like pretty much it these days.
Until the president tries to say, well, on Tuesdays it's purple.
Well, that's the thing, is like, I will take something that Grok will agree with. Like, for example, Caroline Leavitt just now, about half hour ago, said, on behalf of Labor Day, said the president is one of the most pro-worker people in the history. when he's cutting a third of the Department of Labor's budget, right? There will be people who will just tweet at me, and they love this one, that AOC is worth $25 million. It's just not true.
Yeah.
But you could say anything. You could show them any bit of data, and they will just say you're lying. And this is obviously, as we talked about with leadership, starting at the top. So how do we address that?
Look, I think I think social media there are amazing things about social media. It literally opened up the aperture, in my opinion, for organizing. I remember when Mike Brown was gunned down in the street in Missouri. I learned about that on social media. And people like DeRay McKesson and Brittany Packnett were telling stories that the mainstream media were not telling. And the mainstream media had to go to the activists who were on the ground, who were getting their stories out via social media to get to the truth and do what the people on social are already doing. So it has opened up organizing in a way that, I'm sure the civil rights leadership of 60 years ago wish they had. That being said, it has also presented a choose your own adventure situation, to the point where I believe that media literacy should be a class taught in every middle school in America, middle school and high school, because the reality is when people are getting their news from the shade room. Okay? Yeah. They are getting their news from pop things. They are getting their news from these. My mother sent me a thing from one of these random websites that was on Facebook the other day that said I was having a baby. And I'm like, lady, don't you think you would know that I was having a baby? I've lost 50 pounds. Are you insane? Like, girl, get off the internet. But there's a button on every single social media site where we can hide all content like this, so that we are only reinforcing what it is that we think we know. So that's dangerous, because then that shapes our perception. And one's perception is their reality, right? Like, I went through lots of conversations with, some of our former colleagues last year as they were talking about the economy's great. And I'm like, I understand what y'all saying about GDP. But the people's perception is that the economy is not great. So you cannot talk somebody down off of what they feel as though is their truth. And that is what we are dealing with right now, with a lot of these things coming out of the administration. And there's a whole swath of people out there who literally, they are getting their news from one main place. They're getting it from Fox. And they're getting a skewed view on, I would argue, a large amount of things about what is true. And so how do you tell someone their perception is incorrect? Do you inundate them with data? I would argue data doesn't move people's stories to. And so you have to show people. You have to tell people stories. You have to show them real life examples, not data, but examples. You have to put you have to put a face and a name to the thing that we're talking about, to pull people back to Earth One, as my colleague Nicole Wallace would say.
What do you think of the Democrats' response to the misinformation machine? It seemed like, at least for the first few months, there was just a lot of scrambling, a lot of infighting. There's obviously the Schumer, Jeffries presentation. And then now you're seeing Gavin Newsom doing basically a mockery of Trump. What is your perspective on some of the responses so far?
Well, look, I know people are like, Gavin Newsom is the way to go. And I think what the governor is doing is great for the governor. I think if Vice President Kamala Harris would have done what he did, people would have lambasted her. I think if Jasmine Crockett popped up today and started tweeting at Donald Trump in all caps and calling him names and having her account retweet his and go all over these MAGA people would say she was unprofessional. So the governor has a level of privilege that I think he is aware of, and he is wielding it as he should. And yay for Gavin Newsom. But I don't think Democrats writ large across the board should start just trolling the hell out of their... Caps. I mean, Lord, today, because I still think that we are talking about people's lives. And for some people, that is a turnoff. I think Gavin Newsom is getting under Trump's skin, and that's good. Look, I think, the way to combat misinformation is to tell stories and to put a face to what is going on, to literally present people with not data, but stories that undergird what the data says, real things that are tangible that they can touch. It's one thing to say, what Donald Trump is doing with the tariffs is literally making the prices go up at these shipping containers, the shippers are concerned. It's another thing to go into a community and go into the grocery store and bring the cameras or the local news and talk to the people in the store about how it's just really expensive for them and they don't understand why.
Is there a story of all the ones that you've done so far under this administration that sticks with you that you think is particularly compelling?
I think that we talk a lot about the business, right about now, we talk a lot about, in general, about the effect of tariffs and how things are going up. And it is just something, my husband runs the restaurant association here in the region, and he's the CEO and president. And I often overhear, sometimes when he's on a call or when I'm at these events, I hear so many stories about the owners, the operators, and the workers in these businesses throughout the region who they can't stockpile shrimp, right? Who had to pay one person, I heard them say the other day, they had to pay $50,000 to get their shipment of shrimp in. I was like, did he have $50,000 extra dollars? To me, that just made it very clear, how are these people who are small business owners in our communities who are powering our neighborhoods, right? Because in any community you go to across the country, it is your local mom and pop shop if you have it. In New York, it's your bodegas and your local restaurants. These are local owners and operators. How are they supposed to be able to survive and then employ people? What about the people who look to these small businesses? And for me, that's just one example. But that's the economic side of it. You've got that happening while we also have all of these threats to the things that our founding fathers literally laid out in a document that said what's supposed to be going on happening. Literally blowing up, taking a blowtorch to the Constitution on everything from the quartering of troops in our cities to birthright citizenship. Have people forgot? So I do think that it's not easy because the democracy things, unless you are living it every day, right? In Washington, D.C. or in L.A., when the troop, when you can see it with your own two eyes about what's happening. In your community, there was that community in Missouri where they fought to get their neighbor back because this Vietnamese woman who was snatched up by ICE, and they were like, oh, she's been here for forever. This is our neighbor. We don't care if she's undocumented. No, we want her. It's real for those people, but if you're not experiencing it every day, for a lot of people, they're like, I know y'all say democracy's on fire, but my movies are still coming out. I can still go on my cruise or go on my trip, right? My stores are still open. It doesn't, my coffee shop still works. I can go to Pilates. Still, my matcha is still being made. I don't know if it's as bad as they say it is. And that is actually what concerns me more because I think, people can get on board with the economic stuff, I believe. But all of these, who cares about the economy when we living in martial law?
Yep. But how do we snap people out of it, those people who are doing their daily routines and their routines are not being disrupted?
I have been thinking a lot about this. Maybe, again, history gives us examples. Everybody wasn't, I'll use the civil rights movement as an example. During the Montgomery bus boycotts, everybody wasn't boycotting, actually. We tell the stories, and oftentimes history, the historical account reflects that everybody was on board with the boycott and nobody was riding the bus. That's not true. Some people were still riding that bus. But the people who were dedicated, who stayed on the mission, who continued to pick and grab people and say, no, we can't ride the bus. Though there was a small group of people that were dedicated to the mission. And they ended up being successful. And now we talk about the integration of the bus system in Montgomery and then all across the country. So I said to say, maybe we won't reach those people. Maybe they won't be with the pro-democracy coalition. I do think that in these moments, folks are going to have to find the people that are with them, the people that do get it, and organize and strategize and activate with those folks. Because there will be maybe a large swath of people that may never want to come and do the work, may never fully get on board, may never really believe that like democracy is in peril until, maybe after the third election doesn't happen.
Well, but to the point of organizing and energy, at least this is my opinion, I see the leadership of, the Democratic Party. I see, a lot of people talking about policy. And then you see new faces like Zohran Mamdani, who obviously has struck a very clear chord with, at the very least, the population of New York who voted him in. But I think really across the country, people appreciate the fact that he is not shy to say how expensive it is to live in New York and in general.
Yeah.
But then you see parts of the party who are still refusing to embrace him and trying to keep him at arm's length. What is your opinion on that and just how we proceed as a supposed wide tent party?
I think Mamdani is a very interesting example. So when it comes to the party, I think that there's party leadership and then there's the voters, right? Like Democratic voters. And when it comes to Zohran Mamdani, Democratic voters in New York, they overwhelmingly voted for him, but the subset of Democrats that he still has some work to do with is black voters in New York, right? Which are a base of the Democratic Party apparatus. And you've got a lot of older black voters who are like, I don't know about Mamdani, but I was with Cuomo, which is a whole nother conversation, in my opinion, on its own. Because they know him. They don't know Zohran, but they know Cuomo. And there is something about the electorate, and there's something to be said about relationship. And when you are not in relationship with someone, how that correlates to how you vote. And I think that's something people need to understand and explore, and it'll make sense as we go into the midterm elections and then potentially to the next presidential. When it comes to Democratic leadership, I don't understand the rationale that people in New York are using for not supporting their Democratic nominee. I just don't. If I was a New York strategist, if you will, and Cuomo, be honest, and Cuomo won the primary, I would be like, I'm not working for Cuomo, and I'm not because of how he got to be running for this job in the first place. I just don't think that's a situation with Zohran. So I don't understand why this insatiable need for Democratic leadership, particularly as it relates to in New York or elected officials and even some strategists, to not just fully embrace their nominee. I think that it is I really just think it's a failed strategy because it leaves you talking about your division out in the open. Every time at this point that, I wouldn't say every time, but I would say out of 7 of the 10 interviews, last 10 interviews, Leader Jeffries has done, he's asked about his lack of support for Zohran Mamdani. And his answer is always one that's like, oh, Lord, what is going on here?
It goes viral every time.
Yeah, every single time, and that's not good. It takes me back to what I call the very public, the stabbing from the front of Joe Biden in the primary. Regardless of what you felt about if he should be running or not, I do not think it did Democratic voters a service to have that fight with their Democratic nominee and party leadership and elected officials out in the open. And I would argue that my argument was vindicated when a number of people stayed home in this last election. So I don't understand what people think they're going to get out of maybe publicly attacking Zohran Mamdani or feeling like he hasn't really hit the bar yet when the goal, when I worked campaigns, the goal was always to win elections. Okay, so if you're the strategist, if you're the elected official, the goal should be to win the election. The goal, I know, is not you want the Silwa man to be, if you're a Democrat, to be the mayor of New York.
You're wearing that hat.
Yeah. or do you want to split the vote and so much that Cuomo comes in and wins a race that he probably shouldn't have any business winning. Yeah. So I hope Democrats in New York get it together sooner than later, because they are, I think, missing the forest for one tree.
But there's always this stereotype, and I want to know if you agree with this, that Republicans are always tight with their messaging and they're always falling in line, and Democrats tend to infight, right? Like, part of my frustration with the whole President Biden situation is it almost fulfilled the stereotype that Democrats just love to like self-flatulate. And do you agree with that, or what do you think? How do you think we do get more thoughtful about this?
Well, I mean, it was a line, Republicans fall in line, Democrats need to wait to fall in love. That's what it used to be. Look, I think nowadays, I think two things. So first of all, when it comes to Republicans, the current iteration of the Republican Party is not a party that I recognize people talking about. You know, I sit next to Michael Steele every night, and I'm like, these ain't your people anymore. Are you still with them? And he's like, I'm a Republican, not a Trumper. I'm going to help save the party. I'm like, all right, sir, good luck. But when it comes to, so I will just note that. So they've really taken their fall in line, like, I think very, as far as it can possibly go on the spectrum.
Yeah.
I do think that Democrats do need to fall in love. It takes a little bit more, but that's because the ideological makeup of our coalition is different. You know, if you think about the Democratic Party apparatus juxtaposed with the Republican Party apparatus, it used to be that maybe there were maybe 2 or 3 factions under the Republican Party umbrella. I could argue maybe now there's maybe 5. You got your conservatives, you got your, MAGAs, you got your QAnon MAGAs, you got, you have some people that, are still like teetering on there's moderate MAGA, but you're still MAGA, right? So but they by and large all believe the same thing. But if we spent time to talk about the Democratic Party apparatus, the factions that power the machine that is the apparatus is the party committees, the elected officials, right, the donors. The people that power that are made up of various coalitions that do not all believe the same thing. And so because you gotta, there are challenges and opportunities that come with the big tent. And I think that in this last election, the big tent became one of those hindrances where, the tent is so big and all these people have various perspectives, and you've got the apparatus having one conversation and not necessarily consulting with the tent about the people that power the apparatus about what that conversation should be. I think going forward, like as we look at, I remember when Zohran won and people were like, Democrats are not making good decisions. And I'm like, well, why are they singling out Zohran Mamdani? This is another example of how Democrats who have been laser focused on what the constituents that they are looking to serve want and care about being successful because they're being authentic and communicating a very clear and authentic message in a way that people can relate to. That is why Democrats have won just about every single election or outperformed every single election since 2024. So he, to me, was just another example of when you run local, when you pay attention to what people care about, when you are authentic, when you do not poll test the hell out of what you're trying to do, you can be successful. I feel like the people out here are like not actually talking to real people.
Well, to your point about Big Tent and the diversity within the party, when I see the contrast with President Trump and his just war on diversity, equity, and inclusion, you and I are 2 people of color. I got my start because Marty Walsh, the mayor of Boston, very publicly during his campaign said that his cabinet, because Boston was a majority minority city, it was important to him that he have a cabinet that was majority minority people of color. I would not have gotten that job if not for that. And it's not because, well, first of all, there's a million reasons why I'm grateful to Marty Walsh, but he provided opportunity and he took diversity very seriously because he realizes that the different voices at the table that come from different backgrounds are important. Joe Biden did the same thing, right? Like there are people who were, entry-level people in the White House and different agencies who will end up running the White House someday because of that focus and that emphasis. I just see this president complete opposite and just declaring war on DEI, turning that into a negative phrase, right? Woke, hijacking that. What is your thought on just seeing this kind of conversation happening?
Well, look, I think that representation matters. And when you talk to folks within the Trump administration or even Republicans that are still publicly aligned with the administration, right? Because they want to be able to work in this town. They'll say, I can't work if I criticize the president. And I'm like, well, y'all better get it together, okay? Yeah. We are marching towards autocracy. We might be on the road already. They say, well, I mean, he is President Trump that had the first woman to ever be chief of staff to the president. All the women in his cabinet, he's given opportunities to women. And that just really brings me back to the point that representation matters, but it is substantive representation that matters. And I have landed on, I think people love Susie Wiles and they like to highlight Kristi Noem at DHS and, the current labor secretary, right? They like to throw out all these, look at all the women that he's named. Substantive representation. People love Susie Wiles because she gets in no one's way in the White House. Susie Wiles is not stepping on toes. She's not telling Stephen Miller no. She's not telling the president no. She has no control. It is very clear every single day. But sure, yes, she is the first woman to serve as a White House chief of staff. Secretary Noem is out here dressing up, cosplaying as a serious security lady. Okay. It's like what I do when I go skiing, honey. I like to put on the outfits. I'm not getting on the slope, but I got the outfits on, and I'm taking the pictures.
Look good on Instagram.
Looks good on Instagram. That's what Kristi Noem is doing. Not getting in the way of what Tom Homan is executing as at this point, shadow DHS secretary. But sure, a woman is the DHS secretary. He's hiring all these women. You know what I'm saying? So I think substantive representation matters. And the reality of the situation is the people that the reason, I think there's many reasons why there is a war on quote unquote DEI. Some of it goes to this narrative that a number of the people who support the president, core to this MAGA ideology, is that somehow the diversity of this country has given opportunity to people that are unqualified for it. And so when people talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, they are creating opportunity for people that otherwise would be nowhere near it because they are not qualified to have it. And that's like the opposite of what actually DEI initiatives are. You wouldn't have had some of your opportunities. I wouldn't have had some of mine, not because I'm not qualified, but because I wouldn't have had the opportunity. Yeah. People were not looking our way. And so some of these initiatives open the door. But if you are a part of a DEI initiative, if you will, you are supremely overly qualified for what it is 9 times out of 10. I think the other piece is that the reason that they want to dismantle the federal government, in my opinion, is to stop people so that they're not hindered by their agenda. They literally want to create this unitary executive, and when you have career officials, that's very hard to do. But the federal government is the largest employer in this country. And it was the federal government by which, when the private sector would not hire Black people in this country, the federal government would. It is the federal government who helped open the door for the middle class in this country, for Black people in the middle class. That's why not Black and other people of color. That's why everybody I know 9 times out of 10, they got a good government job. My aunt used to talk about going to get a good government job. My daddy had a good government job. They want to destroy that. There is something. Now, I talked to someone yesterday who said, I was sitting in there with the president. I don't think the president hates immigrants. And I was just like, oh my God, this is off topic from the conversation, but okay. I don't think the president hates immigrants, and I don't think the president hates Black people. I think that is some other people around it, but I don't think he hates immigrants and hates Black people. I'm not going to opine on what the president thinks or doesn't think, because I just think he has no center and no core. He just does what he believes is good for him in the moment. But I do believe that there are people that work for the president that have been very clear that they do hate people of color, that they do hate immigrants, and that they do think less of Black people. And those people, like Stephen Miller, are in charge. They're in there in the White House. And so the policies are reflective of the coalition that helped put him into office. And that coalition believes some very terrible things about people of color, immigrants in this country. I would also argue that a lot of well-meaning progressives in this country believe some of the terrible things that some of the people in the MAGA coalition believe. I've worked in progressive politics prior to what I do now for a very long time, and sometimes I couldn't distinguish my progressive friends from my conservative ones.
What comes to mind when you say that?
I told this story on social, and I just remember when I worked for Senator Sanders, once I went to dinner with some of the staff, and the research director was there, our comms director, and some other people. And while we're sitting at the dinner, the research director says, no one is ever going to pay you this much money again. And I just kind of looked like, how the hell we get on me? And I said, well, what do you mean? And he's like, well, you're going to need to get some additional experience. You should probably go and work a governor's race after this. unbeknownst to this well-meaning gentleman that was sitting there, I just came off a governor's race. I worked the 2014 cycle in Nebraska, where it was very hard to be a Democrat and you could not say healthcare, let alone Obama, in 2014. But he made assumptions about what my ability was, what my qualifications were. He assumed that because Bernie Sanders had some issues with some black people, that that's how I got my job, that I was unqualified for doing what I'm doing, and I need to go and get some additional experience. I was shocked. And he like tripled down on it at this table in front of everyone. And I finally like paid my part of the bill and I left. But I never forgot what he said to me. And I've had many other experiences like that throughout my career. But, you know, I don't know where the research guy is right now, but I think he knows where I am.
He's probably watching you on TV.
I think he can see me every night at 7 p.m. sitting next to Alicia Menendez and Michael Steele on MSNBC, giving context to some of the most pressing issues in our country today. And there are many people like the research guy out there in this country who will make assumptions about you based on just off of what they see. There are people that make assumptions about me every single day. They have no idea that I went to Catholic school. And so when I saw those kids who were gunned down in a church during Mass on the first week of school, I remember going to first week of school Mass. Went to Catholic school my entire life. Horrified. I just brought back the feelings of what it was like being excited for the whole school getting together and knowing that that's what those children were enduring, and they were covering their friends, trying to save their life. That's not something they should have to do. That is not a perspective I think anybody would assume that I had, you know? I think a lot of times people are like, well, you from Nebraska? Yes, there are black people in Nebraska. There are black people all over this country. And I grew up in a community where the people that I grew up with, many of them, I mean, I'm friends with Facebook on this day with folks that I went to grade school with in high school and college. Many of them, there are a lot of people that support the president. Okay, I know what it is not a binary situation where the people wish that they lived in a community where everybody agrees with what they agree with. So I do believe that this particular administration and this current iteration of the Republican Party are playing on the real fears and I think ignorance that many people have in this country about folks that do not look like them. And people are being duped into believing. There are people out there that literally believe Lisa Cook is unqualified. This lady is an award-winning economist. Are you kidding me? Like, what you mean unqualified? What? So I would just say the next time somebody tries to call somebody a DI hire, they want to call me a DI hire. Yes, baby, I am, because I'm overly qualified for what I do, for sure. But this idea that people allow the right wing, the deepest depths of the internet, the nasty parts of the internet in this country, to weaponize words to a point where we are walking away from what it is that we believe. I just don't think that's something we should be doing. I think the best way to fight what is happening is to fight fire with fire. You know, when they go low, I say go toe to toe. So, yeah, baby, I'm a DEI hire because I'm overly freaking qualified.
Well, my last question to you is along that theme. There are a lot of people who are scared. Still a lot of people who have checked out after the election in 2024. You've talked a lot about how we engage people and how we talk and persuade people. What's your advice to people who know those individuals in their communities who are still checked out, say, I'm done with politics, or people who voted for President Trump who say, you know, I didn't vote for that, I don't know what to do. Mm-hmm. What message would you give those people?
Well, for the people that say I didn't vote for that, I would say I think it's important to acknowledge what those people are saying, and then note, you know, for the people that say, oh, I didn't vote for, you know, mass deportations, I think you should say, I understand that. They did have signs at the convention. But I understand what you're saying. You weren't one of the people that would be holding those signs. So now that you feel this way, what is it are you going to do about it? Are you going to write your congressman? Are you going to maybe give money to one of these, or to the ACLU or one of these other organizations that is working to combat what this administration is doing? What are you going to, I think people should be directing people to do something with the convergent feelings that they have if they do have them. There are, though, a lot of people that voted for the president that don't have those convergent feelings, okay? That are like, I didn't vote for this, but oh well. It is not my ministry to spend time on those people. If you are listening and that's your ministry, Godspeed, okay? Let me know how it works out. But for these people out there that are like, I just do not do politics. I was talking to somebody the other day. They were like, you know, I really don't concern myself with, you know, politics. I don't really want to just like get out there with my opinion on stuff. You know, I'm not really comfortable with that. And I was like, oh, okay. But then they were talking about a political thing. And I was just like, okay, you know that that is actually politics. They're like, no. I don't do, I was like, what you mean is you don't do political parties. You don't like Democrats, Republicans, or independent. You don't want to do like criticizing of the president directly. That's fine. Like, again, that's not my ministry, but I understand. But I think it is important for people to know that politics is happening every single day, whether we participate or not. It is political to be able to, at this point, get a COVID shot if you're under the age of 65, okay? Shout out to RFK Jr. He did that yesterday as we having this conversation. It is political to get green lettuce in your neighborhood, okay? It is political to where if your child is sick to be able to go to the doctor and they get quality health care. All of that is political. It's political what your children are learning in school. How they are learning, what the curriculum, all of that is political. So politics is happening every day, whether we participate or not. And so I understand that people don't want to, be big D Democrats or big R Republicans or want to get into the independents or any of that. If they don't want to criticize the president directly, okay, that's fine. But do you care about your community? And I think 9 times out of 10, most people do. And you have to meet people where they are on that level. So I encourage people that are trying to, jumpstart some of these folks that are like, I'm not really engaged or involved in politics. Well, what is it that they care about? Meet them where they are, because 9 times out of 10, especially right now, what they care about, it got something to do with politics. It is, in fact, political.
Symone Sanders, co-host of the Weeknight, 7 p.m. Eastern every night, and MSNBC Live. You're going to be in New York or come to New York on October 11th. Thank you for coming on the People's Cabinet.
Thank you for having me. I can't wait. And I really do hope to see some people at the Hammerstein Ballroom in Manhattan for the MSNBC Live. We need it.
Get your tickets going fast. Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the People's Cabinet. If you did, please like, subscribe, ring that bell, and put in the comments below who else you'd like to see sworn in. And stay tuned for new episodes every Tuesday. Let's go.